Betrayal and manipulation in the family. How I faced it all and discovered secrets I never expected. It was early November when everything began to quietly fall apart. I remember waking up every day with a feeling of oppression in my chest, as if the air were growing thicker with each passing morning. Nothing catastrophic had happened yet. No major loss, no major fight, no accident, no bankruptcy. But there was something, almost invisible, that seemed to corrode everything from within. It was as if my own life had lost its color, even though everything was in place. At the time, I lived in a well-located apartment, had been married for 5 years, and had a well-paying job. From the outside, everything seemed fine. Inside, the silence screamed. The days began to drag by as if I were walking with weights on my feet. And worst of all, I didn't understand exactly what was happening. When pain has no name, it seems to spread even further. I felt like a stranger within my own routine, within my own body, within my own home. My name is Bruna, and this is the story of the worst yet most transformative phase of my life. I was 33 when the truth began knocking on my door, or rather, seeping through the cracks. At the time, I worked as a communications manager at a solid company. I was known for being efficient, focused, and practical. I prided myself on being someone who kept my word, someone people trusted. But at home, things were more complex than I could admit. Raphael, my husband, seemed distant. He wasn't aggressive nor cold, just absent. I tried to justify it. It's work, it's fatigue, it's routine. But his absence began to become more present. His lost glances, the more frequent text messages, the excuses for not being home. I felt it, but I didn't want to see it, because seeing it meant accepting that something serious was happening. And, at that point in my life, accepting any disorder was accepting that I had lost control. And control has always been my favorite disguise. It was during a seemingly ordinary Sunday that the realization came. We were at home, having lunch with Raphael's family. Carlos and Helena, his parents, were there, along with Livia, his adoptive sister. She was younger, about 7 years younger than Raphael, and had always been treated with great affection by everyone, including me. But that day, for the first time, I noticed something in the looks they exchanged. It wasn't sisterly affection. It was something else, a kind of silent tension, burning beneath the surface. I found myself observing too much, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But by the evening, the doubt had already taken root. I began noticing messages, actions, and laughter that I'd previously ignored. And each new detail pulled me deeper into a reality I didn't want to face. Raphael was being seduced, yes, but not by a coworker, nor by an ex. It was by his own adoptive sister, someone who grew up alongside him and now seemed determined to invade our space, our marriage, my life. At first, my mind tried to rationalize. She's young, she's impulsive, maybe it's just admiration. You're overreacting. I felt paranoid for suspecting something so absurd. But the more I tried to suppress my suspicion, the more it gained momentum. I began to notice how Livia was present in everything. She sent messages at odd hours, created excuses to come to our house, made comments about how Raphael was too special to be tied down so early. One night, he left saying he was going to take care of a matter at the family office. I decided to follow him, guided by something that, to this day, I'm not sure if it was intuition or pure desperation. I arrived at the building and saw them in the car, talking intensely with a closeness no sibling should have. In that moment, my world fell apart. I didn't scream. I didn't make a fuss. I just walked out of there, my legs shaking and my throat tight. This wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was a shattering of everything I'd believed was safe. It was the rupture of my sanity. I spent days not knowing what to do. I would wake up and wonder if it was all real, or if I was just creating a story in my head. I began to blame myself, reviewing every moment of the past few years, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. What had I missed? When had I become invisible in my own home? I wanted to talk to Raphael. I wanted answers, but at the same time I couldn't bear to hear confirmation of what I already knew. So I did what I always did when life tried to dismantle me. I went within. I locked myself in silence, I observed. I began to write down behaviors, dates, and speeches. I spoke to a close friend, sharing only the essentials. She looked me in the eye and said, "You're going to need to be stronger than ever." And that's when I understood that it wasn't just about saving a marriage. It was about saving myself. Because at that moment, the biggest risk wasn't losing Raphael. It was losing myself. I began arming myself with information and strategies, not to create an explosive confrontation, but to build a solid foundation on which to stand. I researched, observed, took screenshots, and saved messages and documents, all carefully to avoid discovery. The fear of becoming vulnerable was with me, but the desire to protect what I had built, my story, my marriage, was greater. It was a silent war, where I needed to be clever and firm, without losing my composure. I knew Livia's manipulations would not be simple, because she was a master at playing the victim and turning others against me. Her parents, who initially viewed me with suspicion and thought I was overreacting, became yet another obstacle. That family was divided, and I felt increasingly alone in the midst of the hurricane. At work, my emotions threatened to spill over at any moment, and I felt like a tightrope walker trying to hold everything together while my inner world collapsed. The nights were long, sleepless, and I spent hours wondering what to do. The temptation to give up, to pretend nothing was happening, was immense. I even thought that perhaps it would be better to accept the emotional betrayal and try to rebuild something different from it, even with a broken heart. But an inner voice screamed at me not to give in. That truth and self-respect must prevail. During that time, I learned that the greatest struggle was not against the other, but against my own fears and doubts. The feeling of impending loss threatened to consume me, but I needed to find the strength to resist. One night, after a particularly difficult day, I received an anonymous message with a recording showing a clear conversation between Raphael and Livia, where she tried to manipulate and seduce my husband, planning a future in which he would be far from me. It was as if someone had removed the blindfold from my eyes. The feeling of pain was immediate, a mixture of betrayal, anger, and helplessness. I could have given up at that moment. I could have thrown everything away and given in to sadness. But instead, I felt a spark of determination I hadn't known existed until then. I needed to use that evidence to protect what was mine and to ensure no one would doubt my word. That recording became the turning point. I finally had something concrete to use to face the situation, and most importantly, to face myself. From that moment on, I began seeking professional help. I sought out a therapist to deal with the whirlwind of emotions that consumed me. I discovered that talking about what I was experiencing helped me process the pain and develop strategies to move forward. Therapy was a turning point, as it allowed me to recognize patterns I hadn't even imagined existed within myself and my relationship. I understood that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but rather an essential step toward healing. At the same time, I relied on the support of close friends, who became my safety net and emotional support. They helped me maintain perspective and not lose faith in my ability to start over, even when it seemed impossible. It was a slow process, full of ups and downs, but each small victory was proof that I could overcome. Despite the difficulties, I began to notice profound internal changes. My fear began to diminish, giving way to a new confidence I had never felt before. I gradually managed to establish clear boundaries with Raphael and his family. It wasn't an easy task, as the family dynamics were deeply ingrained, and I had to face criticism, judgment, and even veiled threats. But that new version of me wouldn't be intimidated. I began to respect myself more, to refuse excuses or justifications that hurt me. Each small gesture of self-care was a building block in rebuilding my self-esteem. There were still wounds, there were still doubts, but the feeling of fighting for something real and just gave me the strength to carry on. Little by little, the chaos began to transform into a solid structure, built with courage and determination. As I progressed on this journey of reconstruction, I began to notice that what had previously seemed like an isolated problem was much more deep-rooted and complex. The manipulation wasn't coming from Livia alone, but from an entire family system that for years had covered up and justified toxic behavior in the name of protecting a blood or adoptive bond. Carlos and Helena, who previously seemed to support me only superficially, began to clearly position themselves against me. I felt the weight of rejection, as if I were fighting invisible ghosts whispering that I was the villain of the story. But even in the face of this, I didn't give up. I used this emotional exhaustion to further strengthen my conviction that I deserved respect, love, and the truth. I didn't let the loneliness of the struggle consume me. On the contrary, it made me seek out my allies even more, the people who truly stood by me. and wanted to see justice prevail. These were intense months of internal and external confrontation. Raphael, who had previously been passive, began to realize he could no longer hide behind silence and omission. I began presenting the evidence I had gathered gradually, at strategic moments, so there would be no room for lies or denial. It was a painful process because I still loved him, and even in the face of betrayal, I wanted to believe he could change, that he could acknowledge his mistakes, and that we could rebuild together. But I also knew I needed to be realistic, and that broken trust couldn't be repaired overnight. There were times when hope made me feel fragile, almost on the verge of giving up, and others when the pain of betrayal felt like an unbearable weight to carry. The balance between love and disillusionment became the most difficult battleground of my life. At that time, I realized how vulnerable I was to emotional manipulation, not only from Livia, but also from a pattern I had within myself of trying to please everyone and forgetting myself. This awareness was liberating. Understanding that I didn't need to bear the responsibility for other people's behavior gave me a new lease on life. I decided that my priority was to take care of myself, rebuild my self-esteem, and make it clear that self-love was the foundation of any healthy relationship. It was a learning process in which I needed to look within, honestly, accept my flaws, and understand that overcoming wasn't about being perfect, but about being true to myself. This internal shift began to reflect in all areas of my life, including how I positioned myself with Raphael's family and the difficulties that arose. Meanwhile, Livia wouldn't give up trying to destroy what I had built. Her obsession with her brother surpassed ethical and moral boundaries, and she became increasingly aggressive in her attempts to destabilize me. I discovered attempts to invade my privacy, false accusations, and even financial fraud against me, all to get me out of the way. It was an escalation that made me fear not only for my relationship, but for my physical and emotional safety. In those moments, I felt very small in the face of such evil, but it was also when I realized that true strength lies not in those who make the loudest noise, but in those who silently persist in seeking justice. I began gathering evidence for legal action, seeking legal support and protection. This part of the struggle taught me resilience, patience, and the importance of knowing when to ask for help. The legal process was exhausting and painful. I reviewed every moment of my story, every lie, every manipulation, with the calmness necessary to build a solid case. It wasn't easy facing Raphael in court, much less his parents, who still tried to defend their adopted daughter despite the evidence. But even in the face of exhaustion, I managed to remain firm and focused on what really mattered: the truth and my dignity. The trial brought consequences for Livia, who was officially disinherited and removed from her family, and a new stance for Carlos and Helena, who finally acknowledged my suffering and began to genuinely support me. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a concrete step toward a new beginning. I emerged from that phase with the certainty that, even in the most difficult situations, it is possible to rebuild and reinvent yourself, and that the strength to do so resides within each of us. After the legal process and the upheaval in family dynamics, my life began to take on new contours. I was no longer that woman who passively accepted silent injustices and disguised betrayals. The experience taught me the power of self-defense, not just in the legal sense, but in the ability to draw clear boundaries, to speak firmly about what is acceptable and what is not. This reverberated in all areas of my life. At work, for example, I gained a more assertive and confident posture, which helped me take on new responsibilities and even earn the respect of colleagues who previously doubted my capabilities. Overcoming the crisis didn't transform me into an unbeatable superhero, but it gave me a simple and powerful conviction: that I deserve to be treated with respect, loyalty, and love. Self-care became a daily priority. I understood that taking care of myself wasn't a selfish act, but a vital necessity to move forward. I began investing in healthy habits, both physical and emotional, meditation, exercise, a balanced diet, and regular therapy. These small practices became anchors during turbulent times, reminding me that I was more than the pain I carried. Little by little, my self-esteem blossomed again, becoming more mature and resilient. I learned that my happiness didn't depend on someone else's approval or presence, but rather on my own commitment to myself. And this emotional autonomy was, without a doubt, one of the greatest victories I achieved. Reinventing. My life also meant rethinking what I wanted for the future. My marriage with Raphael underwent a slow and delicate rebuilding process. But above all, I began to see that my life couldn't revolve solely around him or anyone else. I began pursuing my own dreams, goals, and passions. I revisited old projects I'd put aside and allowed myself to try new things. It was a movement of freedom that brought me a renewed sense of purpose. There were still wounds, of course, but they no longer defined me. I was becoming someone capable of building happiness even after pain, of rising again even after a fall. This awakening was a beautiful and at the same time challenging process, requiring a lot of courage and self-love. Looking back today, I see that this journey was a testament to my resilience and the human capacity to overcome even the darkest moments. I won't lie, I still carry scars, doubts, and some unresolved pain. But what has changed is that now I know I don't have to carry all of this alone. I've learned to ask for help, to talk about my struggles, and to recognize that true strength lies in being vulnerable. My story isn't an example of perfection, but rather of humanity, full of mistakes and stumbles, but also of real and profound achievements. I hope sharing this experience inspires others to never give up on themselves, even when the path seems impossible. Life has a mysterious way of surprising, and overcoming obstacles is an act of courage that we can all learn to practice. As time passed, my relationship with Raphael transformed into something different from what I'd initially imagined. It wasn't a fairy tale, but a more honest relationship based on mutual respect, even if marked by the scars of the past. We decided together to take a step back, breathe, and reconsider whether it was truly worth continuing that marriage. This decision wasn't easy, because I deeply loved the person he was, but I understood that love alone isn't enough to heal wounds or guarantee happiness. We began to build a new kind of relationship, based on clear communication, respected boundaries, and above all, my priority of protecting myself emotionally. It was a daily exercise in patience, understanding, and self-love, which helped me grow as a woman and as a person. Reconnecting with my friends, those who have been with me since the beginning of the crisis, was another fundamental step. They were my support, my safe haven during the most difficult moments, and knowing I wasn't alone made all the difference. Sharing my experience with them, hearing other stories, and realizing I wasn't an isolated island in this struggle strengthened my sense of belonging and hope. Human connection, I've discovered, is one of the most powerful forces we have to weather storms. And that's precisely why I decided to share my story here, so that others know that, despite the pain and difficulties, there is a path to overcoming and to a life with more lightness and authenticity. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone going through a similar situation, it would be this: don't underestimate your inner strength. It's normal to feel lost, afraid, even think about giving up. I've been there, and I know how endless these moments can seem. But believe in yourself, seek help, build your support network, and above all, nurture your self-esteem. No betrayal or toxic situation defines who you are. What defines you is how you choose to react and rise after the fall. Every small step toward healing is a victory, and no pain is greater than your ability to rebuild yourself. This journey is yours, and you deserve to live it with courage and dignity. Despite all the pain and conflict, what I gained was profound self-knowledge. I learned to recognize my own needs, to put myself first without guilt, and to value my inner peace above any external expectations. Today, I feel stronger and more confident to face any challenge life brings me. I know there will still be difficult moments, but now I understand that they don't define me. They are part of a larger process, which includes growth, learning, and above all, self-love. This story I share doesn't have a perfect ending, but it does have a true ending, one that reflects my true journey and the hope I carry for the future. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my experience and hope it touches someone going through a similar situation. Overcoming adversity isn't a straight line, nor a magic formula, but a path made up of daily choices, the courage to face yourself, and the love to rebuild. If I could do it, you can too. Never forget, what truly matters is you, your dignity, and your ability to rise, even when everything seems to be falling apart. Life goes on, and the strength to start over lives within you. Thank you for listening and for being part of this community where we can be vulnerable and strong at the same time. We're on this journey together.